I'm honored to have back with me my next guest, who I consider not only a friend, but I believe one of the best investigative journalists, not just in our country, not just in North America, but the world. And might I say, not just one of the best, but one of the most courageous. I want to take you back to March of 2017. Our next guest, Mary Fanning, and her partner, Alan Jones, they published an article about the illegal surveillance that had occurred during the Obama administration. Illegal surveillance that was not just abuse of the NSA system, which was well known and has been well known. You know, there are some people out here that are acting like this NSA abuse issue, well, this is new news. No, come on, stop it. Guests of this show, friends of this show, Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe, the two top surveillance experts in the world, underline experts, underline world, left the NSA. Bill was technical director of the NSA in 2001. And one of the reasons was because of the illegal use of the NSA database about Americans being spied on through their phones, internet activity, financial transactions, text messages, without warrants, through abuse of the NSA system. That's old news. But yet, and here we are in 2020, you have people saying, wow, the NSA 702 form abuse and the NSA was abused. Wow, that's new. No, come on, that's old. But what Mary Fanning and Alan Jones presented was, in fact, that there was another surveillance system that had been created. An illegal surveillance system, one in which was very different actually than the NSA system, because the way actually Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe, when they developed that NSA system, they put an internal log system. So if you started doing something illegally and unmasking people and monitoring their activities, there was an internal reporting system. But on this other system that Mary and Alan reported about, there was no reporting system. It was called parallel platforms, and in particular type of parallel platform called the Hammer. They wrote about that in 2017. And then on March 19, 2017, with the support of Admiral Ace Lyons, General Tom McInerney came on this show and let it out and spoke about Mary and Alan's work and also other information they had from military intelligence sources, and spoke about that platform. And guess what, folks? Guess what? All this stuff, all this information that started coming out this week about General Flynn and his phone calls that were monitored, guess what? Guess what has been shown? What Mary Fanning and Alan Jones reported on over 3 years ago and were derided for and were slandered and libeled and targeted, as were General McInerney, Ace Lyons, myself, Bill Binney, Kirk Wiebe. Guess what, folks? Everything Mary and Alan wrote about 3 years ago and we've been discussing for over 3 years was in fact proven 110% correct. If it were not for Mary Fanning and Alan Jones and Ace Lyons, Admiral Ace Lyons and General Tom McInerney, our country would be far worse off than it is today. Background on Mary Fanning. Mary is a national security investigative journalist. I encourage you to go to the website, theamericanreport.org. And also publishes at the Center for Security Policy. She's a contributor to Breitbart News, LifeZed, Big League Politics, 1776 Channel, and Communities Digital News. As I said, she collaborates with Alan Jones. Mary, welcome back to Operation Freedom.
Dave, it's so nice to be with you. Thank you.
Okay, Mary, let's get right to it. You published an article with Alan Jones day before yesterday entitled Obama Exposed. There were no FISA warrants. There was no incidental surveillance. There was the Hammer, the persecution of General Flynn. Take our audience through the surgical dissection that you did yet again on the illegal surveillance that was run by O'Brien, Brennan, and Clapper through the CIA.
Well, let me start by saying first, initially the hammer was a legal tool. It was designed and built by Dennis Montgomery as a foreign surveillance tool. It was only to be used for foreign surveillance. It was put in place in 2003 to keep America safe, and it did, and to guard our troops in the battlefield. The original hammer in 2003, there were multiple echelons of sign-offs and safeguards, up to and including the President of the United States. So anyone who accessed this powerful foreign surveillance tool had to leave fingerprints and sign in. They had to have permission from the FISA court, including the President of the United States. However, on February 3rd, 2009, Brennan and Clapper moved the hammer to Fort Washington, and they turned the hammer on the American people instead of using it as a foreign surveillance tool. At that point, initially, they tried to destroy Dennis Montgomery's reputation. They tried to discredit him. They put all sorts of information out. And then after they thought they had duly discredited him and his reputation, they hired him back. And so Dennis Montgomery was working with Brennan and Clapper, and they saw that they had taken the hammer and they were turning it on the American people. He tells that they were turning it on the American people for the purpose of blackmail and leverage. Montgomery told that they were blackmailing and wiretapping Supreme Court justices, 156 Article III judges, members of Congress, business leaders, and most particularly, Donald Trump. Also, Dennis Montgomery told that they were wiretapping, that they were surveilling illegally General Michael Flynn and his family. At one point, and the story begins when Dennis first goes to Washington, D.C., and he hands over a cache of SAP documents.
What's SAP mean?
That's in fact, no one had even really heard of SAP. It's so high-level intelligence. Dennis Montgomery holds a TS-SCI, which is a top security clearance with access to SAP. That's a special access program. To the best of our knowledge, a special access program contains our top, most secret intelligence, such as, say, the location of our nuclear silos or our live intel. So all of our assets, our live assets, our spies around the globe are known as SAP intelligence, because in order to view SAP, even a general has to leave his phone, even a general who's actually allowed to view this, has to leave their phone, their pen, anything, and go in a room, in a skiff. It's a secure room where they're under military guard to make sure that that information remains secure. It's that imperative that that information remains secure. If you remember, the first time we heard of it was in Hillary Clinton's emails, and then we learned that not only did she have SAP information in her emails, but also that 1 year after she took office, we no longer had live intel left in China. So someone was hacking her email and getting access to that information.
So Dennis took this SAP material, brought it to Washington. When was that?
That was in August of 2014.
Okay,
and Dennis,
take it from there.
Dennis met with, his attorney brought him to meet with the one-time head of the FISA court, U.S. District Judge Royce Lamberth. He presented him with a cache of documents that contained SAP information. The information had come before Judge Royce Lamberth as his head of the FISA court, so he recognized the information. Judge Lamberth then took that information. Well, first I have to step back. Judge Lamberth, at that point, also confirmed Dennis's TS-SCI with access to SAP, that he was holding this information. So he stepped away, confirmed his security clearance, which indeed he did and still does have. Montgomery handed him this cache of information. Judge Royce Lamberth recognized it. He then tried to get people's attention with this. He finally took it to first James Comey, director of the FBI, and then he took it to his longtime friend, whom he had worked with before, James Baker, who was general counsel of the FBI. They then worked to strike immunity agreements for Dennis Montgomery so that Montgomery would hand over the 47 hard drives of proof of illegally harvested information on Americans, and that he would hand this back to the FBI.
Now, Mary, there are some people that claim that he never turned that information in, but in fact, James Baker, the former general counsel, the lead counsel to the FBI under James Comey, actually testified under oath in Congress in October 2018 that he actually sent a team down. He named Montgomery and the fact that they did obtain that information from Montgomery. Is that a true statement?
Yes, he sent his FBI special agents down to Florida to pick up the 47 hard drives, and he spoke under oath and said that the information contained evidence that the government contractor had come across that unlawful surveillance was taking place by the government of Americans and including government officials. And so he wanted to give that information to the Bureau, which eventually did take place. They gave Dennis Montgomery immunity. He first handed over the 47 hard drives, and then he came up to an FBI skiff in the Washington field office with Assistant U.S. Attorney Deborah Curtis, who was out of the DOJ's National Security Division, and he gave her over 3 hours of videotaped testimony, and then
and he was under oath then too, correct?
He was under oath. He was with his attorney in the skiff.
Was he ever charged with perjury?
No, he was never charged with anything. He was given immunity, 2 immunity agreements.
So they enhanced his immunity after he did this 3-hour video?
After all the information was verified when he first handed over, and then he gave testimony, they gave him the 2 immunity agreements, yes.
Now, Mary, how does this relate to what happened this past week with General Flynn and those phone calls with the Russians?
Well, this week we had Lindsey Graham. We found out that he was not only questioning General Clapper and Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, but then we put the timelines together and further information that Sally Yates had, upon coming into the DOJ in D.C., she came in April 2015, and within 1 month, Sally Yates, arriving at the DOJ headquarters, barred the IG from the National Security Division, which had taken possession of all of Dennis Montgomery's information that he had handed over. So the Inspector General at the DOJ's National Security Division was barred from the National Security Division. So he had no oversight over what crimes were being committed, nor was he aware then of the information that Dennis Montgomery had given to the DOJ's National Security Division and the FBI.
And there was all this information released this week about the unmaskings of General Flynn. I believe 49 events by over 24 Obama officials. But the calls that General Flynn made to the Russian ambassador during the transition between the Obama administration and the Trump administration occurred on December 29th, 2016 and December 31st, 2016. Yet when the unmasking schedule came out that was released by Grinnell, the director of national intelligence now, it showed that between after December 28th and until January 5th, there were no unmaskings of General Flynn. Now, why is that so
documentation?
important?
There were no FISA warrants, and there was no documentation of any incidental surveillance.
Okay, so those calls occurred December 29th and December 31st, yet Comey and McCabe stated that Obama was aware of the Flynn Kislyak, the Russian ambassador's phone calls as of January 3rd. If there was no unmasking of General Flynn between December 28th and January 5th, how in the world did Obama become aware of those phone calls if it wasn't done through the NSA platform and the unmaskings?
Well, there's no other way, but when one views the testimony between with Lindsey Graham questioning them, is a member. He's now the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he's questioning them. You know, how did they get this? There's no evidence of FISA warrants. There's no evidence. There's no documentation of incidental surveillance, and also who took this information and trying to frame and smear General Flynn to the Washington Post and let that out to the public. You know, we also now know that under oath, General Clapper told that the Russians did not want Donald Trump because he was a known entity to win the presidency, and in fact that they were quite favorable to Hillary Clinton winning. So everything that they've been selling, these false narratives, this mockingbird narrative, which is absolutely contrary to the truth. The facts are the opposite of everything that they have presented on news channels for 3.5 years.
So the only way President Obama could have known about those phone calls, if it wasn't on the NSA platform and it wasn't through FISA abuse, it had to be through another illegal surveillance platform, such as the Hammer. Is that a false statement, or is that accurate?
That's a correct statement. So, you know, they had no evidence of this, and then they have this meeting in the Oval Office.
And that occurred on January 5th, 2017, and Sally Yates, who was at the Department of Justice, was at that meeting. And tell us why that was so significant.
Because in that meeting, Barack Obama is telling them information that they have no proof where he would have gotten that information. So that exposes him using an illegal surveillance tool. And keep in mind, when Brennan Clapper moved the Hammer to Fort Washington, and it no longer has any fingerprints or footprints, who's accessing it? Now there's no proof where Barack Obama got this information. There's no backup to where he's doing this. So they're illegally surveilling the incoming administration. And beyond that, we've already known about the Hammer because in the whistleblower tapes that federal district judge G. Murray Snow released, they told that they were using the Hammer. And further, it's imperative to remember that the CIA has no charter. The CIA has no charter to spy on Americans or in this country. It's a violation of our civil rights.
It's a criminal act.
It's a felony, yes.
And in fact, you mentioned Lindsey Graham interviewing Sally Yates, the Department of Justice, and James Clapper, the then director of National Intelligence under Obama, on May 8th, 2017, under oath at a congressional hearing. And he was, as you stated, pushing them about, wait a minute, where did this information on these calls come from? And in fact, their answers were very troubling to two people at the FBI that were monitoring that testimony, that being Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. In fact, you present this in your fantastic article this week that's available at theamericanreport.org. And we now have the text release of what they were saying. You can't don't say the F word, but Strzok did use the F-bomb, drop the F-bomb. Educate our listeners in what those two were going back and forth with as Clapper and Yates were testifying, and why it panicked those two criminals at the FBI.
Well, Peter Strzok texts his putative paramour, Lisa Page, a filthy expletive. He says, "Are you watching, Sally?" And he says the vile word. He says, "Clapper and Yates, through Graham's questions, are all playing into there should be an unmasking request, a record for incidental collection, incorrect narrative." In other words, they're not carrying forward the proper lies because they're exposing that's right, there was no incidental collection record, there was no FISA record. We're caught. They're running off the rails. Not only does he text this to Lisa Page, Peter Strzok then, after the testimony's over, he says, "I'm free if you have a couple of minutes." And I just called your desk. I'm free again. And then within an hour, they go and meet. And then he texts again. He said, "Listen, if you have some time and it's not late, I have a follow-up question for something that you just said, something you said. I know you've got Bill's session right now." So apparently they did meet, and then he has a follow-up question from that meeting. So they're very disturbed of what's just taken place in front of Lindsey Graham in their questioning, because they both just blew it. They were both stammering and stuttering and squirming in their seats, and Lindsey Graham said, "I'm going to get to the bottom of this. If there's no FISA record, if there's no documentation of incidental surveillance, then there's more to this, and I will get to the bottom of it."
And then we go to this meeting at the White House on January 5th, 2017, when Sally Yates realizes that Obama at this meeting is talking about information related to the General Flynn Russian Kislyak's phone calls, and that he had to have obtained this through an illegal surveillance platform outside of the NSA, outside of incidental contact picked up through the FISA. She states on the record that she's so taken back by this, she couldn't even comprehend the rest of the conversation because she was just so distraught. She was distraught.
Yeah.
Why was she distraught, Mary?
Because he's exposed himself that he had gotten it by illegal means. There was nothing to back up where he had gotten this from, so he has just exposed that he is spying on the incoming administration, their national security advisor. They are running a spying campaign on the duly elected president and his national security advisor.